44 years, James Michael Algeo served Lansdale Catholic High School as a teacher and coach during an era that spanned 9 presidential administrations. His football teams won 295 games and a state championship, but that record is only one part of the legacy that Jim Algeo left us when he passed away on January 20th. And we're here to talk about that legacy today. My name is Rick Woelfel, and I'm joined by 3 really remarkable people. Bridget Algeo, the 5th of Jim and Mickey Algeo's 9 children, and the author of the book Football Family, which is a truly remarkable read. Her sister, Veronica Algeo, and Mike Stern, who had the privilege of covering Jim Algeo for a number of years when he was working with the North Penn Reporter, a longtime sports writer, journalist, and media personality. Thank you all for joining us today. And Bridget, thanks for putting all this together. You're in charge of all the technical requirements, and thank you for the effort you put into this.
Oh, you're welcome. And I want to give a shout out to my son, Dylan. He was the main IT person getting this going. So to resolve some of the audio issues. And I also want to start by, thanking you, Rick, for number one, you did such a great job remembering our mom back in November. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you today about our father. Mike did such a fantastic job. I can't even put it into words. There's really no word that comes to mind. When I read his forward from time to time, and I'm really in awe of it. And what I hoped for, he went beyond that. And of course, Veronica knows she was my lifeline when it came to remembering games and stats and different moments, because she seems to have them all recorded in her memory for 44 years. So thank you all for being here.
Bridget, I'm going to start with you, and this might be a tough question. Going back to the day of your dad's funeral, and a couple of things struck me about that. First of all, the turnout, despite the terrible weather on that occasion, but also you and I had a chance to reflect on the idea that your dad and your mom and your brother were together again. And I know that gave you a lot of comfort, you and your family comfort at a very difficult time.
For sure. I would say when Danny passed, that was the worst day of my life, really. And I'd say the only thing that challenges that was watching my dad have to say goodbye to my mom in November. That was really, really hard. So on that day in January, there was sort of a peace, I would say, knowing that they were all together, for sure. It was a very beautiful service, the funeral, and we were really touched by, so much of the community that came out and joined in the celebration of his life. The current LC football team and past members formed the honor guard. It was just really, really beautiful. The rain didn't daunt that, and it actually stopped, and the sun came out at the end. So it was a beautiful day in the end.
Ronnie, you remarked on this when we did the podcast, that your mom and your dad really were a team in the truest sense of the word for 60 years, and that's really remarkable. So I'll let you speak to that for a moment, please.
Yeah, I mean, they were and are up in heaven a wonderful team. And I mean, I remember growing up, it seemed very natural that it just seemed normal to us that my mom was doing the uniform, washing the laundry of the dirty LC football uniforms for a bunch of years when Bridget and I were little. And she also would paint the helmets with the hatchets for defense and the stars for offense. And eventually that went to my sisters and their friends. And then I think came back to my mom, if I remember correctly. This would be after wins. She was very engaged in everything with LC football and really LC itself, and as well as St. Stan's. I mean, all the way up until the end of last school year, they were still doing St. Stan's Catholic education prep. They would help teach that on Sundays to kids who weren't at St. Stan's school, went to public school or other types of schooling like homeschooling, or I guess, but they would come to St. Stan's Catholic prep to get a Catholic education. And my parents were involved with that all the way up through last year.
Mike, what was your first exposure to Coach Algeo when you joined the staff at the Reporter? It was actually well ahead of the football season.
It was my first assignment ever at Lansdale Catholic, the beginning of, I think, a beautiful relationship, was a basketball game. And I ascend the steps into the gymnasium, and who's there but Coach Algeo? Jim Algeo is standing there with the big Irish grin. And he welcomes me. He thanks me for being there that night. And I was amazed because I was right out of Temple University and I really hadn't covered a lot of football. And I heard all these stories about how football coaches screamed and yelled and swore. Coach Algeo didn't do that, but I didn't know what to expect. And here I encountered this soft-spoken man with the lineman's body. And right away, I knew I was going to look forward to covering football that fall, that coming fall, which would have been 78. I was amazed, and I was so happy to encounter a person who I knew on the practice field and on game night on the sideline was screaming and gesticulating, and yet right here as the face of Lansdale Catholic Athletics, what a gentleman. And he really put me at ease. And then, of course, I met the basketball coach. I met a lot of the student athletes, but he was the one who, if you will, shepherded me into Lansdale Catholic that night, almost as if God had planned it that way, God's plan. We talk about that very frequently.
What was it like to cover him when you first got into the football season? I'm thinking preseason, which is a hectic time for everybody. The coaches have a lot to get done in a short amount of time. Reporters have a lot to get done in a short amount of time. So what was it like when you started dealing with him on a more professional level once the football season got started?
Well, of course, during practice, he was a whirling dervish, as were his assistant coaches. It was very organized. And then he always took time to be able to be available, if you will, to the media. And he always dealt with the media in a very calm way. He wasn't emotional. It wasn't about him. It was about his student athletes. It was about their progress. It was about how well they were grasping the techniques that they would need. And even more than that, you could tell he was concerned that these lessons on the football field would transcend into their personal lives. So by being disciplined on the practice field and on game night, they would be disciplined as people as they move forward into their lives.
That's a very true.
One of the things.
If I could jump in here really fast to add on
Sure.
to what Mike just said. It's a really true statement. An example of that was when my dad passed on to heaven and rejoined my mom and Danny. During the viewing, this one former player came through, and he had previously been a running back for my dad back in the late 90s. And he was saying that he told me the story in the viewing line that how much that impacted him. And he said he had never fumbled in his whole career. And then one rainy night up at Pottstown, it was a close game, and late in the game, in the fourth quarter, he fumbled. And he came off to the sideline. It was probably early fourth quarter. There was still time to go. And he came off to the sideline, and it was the only time he had fumbled. And Dad got mad at him and said, hold on to the ball, secure the ball. And he goes, Coach, it's the first time I fumbled. He goes, don't fumble. Hold on to the ball and secure the ball. And he goes, And the guy, now grown man, is looking me right in the eye, and he's like, your dad, I'll never forget it. It was basically, he was saying, don't rest on your laurels. There's no excuses. Make no excuses and do what you're supposed to do. And as he said, that lesson stuck with me forever. So kind of adds on to what Mike was saying.
One of the things that comes to mind, coaches talk all the time, Mike, and both you and I have heard this cliche that football or basketball or whatever it is an extension of the classroom, and coaches say that. But sometimes coaches get away from that. They get caught up in trying to win games. They get caught up in seeing to it that their players get a scholarship or whatever. Coach Algeo never got away from that. He really espoused that philosophy, and he lived it and saw to it that his players did. And I'll ask you first, Mike, and then Bridget, and then Veronica. Why do you think he was so successful at that?
Well, and I want to relive a scene, and I can still see it. I'm on the 3 fields of green right now. I'm back at a practice that I attended in 1978. It could have been 1979, or it could have been a combination. But one of his players was not doing something correctly. He was an interior lineman, and I'm just making up an Irish thing. Finnegan, you got to get in there. You got it. And looked like coach was about to tear Finnegan's head off. And then a few seconds later, put his arm around Finnegan in a fatherly voice, reassured him that he could be successful. And that's how he coached. 1 minute, he was screaming at a young person, and football coaches scream. I don't think that's illegal, okay? Next moment, he's talking to a young man as if a father or a grandfather would be talking to him. And that's why he was so successful. He knew how to treat student athletes, and they respected him for that. And as a sports writer, I respect it, because you hate to see a coach yelling at a kid. But if you know that coach is there going to put their arm around the young and tell them, you can do this, and reassure them, I think that's a wonderful quality. And it's a wonderful quality in the classroom as well. Myself as a teacher, I haven't put my arm around anybody, but I'll quietly go up to a student who may be misbehaving and telling them, hey, you can do this, come on. And so I wasn't a teacher back then, but I eventually became a teacher when I was in Texas, and I'm a substitute now in coastal Delaware. And I can tell you that as a coach and as a teacher, the lessons of Jim Algeo were not lost on me.
That was really, really great, Mike. Thank
Bridget,
you.
I'm thinking too, his faith was so strong. The foundation that he grew up with and established, and I think most of our viewers know that he once considered going into the priesthood. That stayed with him his entire life. So it was really something that he lived his life by. So it was natural for him to take it into the calling that he found, which was teaching and coaching. It came very naturally to him, I think.
I think you said it perfectly. You know, one of his assistant coaches, Dan Shaw, I remember she and I were teachers together at St. Stan's in Lansdale. And I remember her remarking one day of how my father didn't just say faith, family, and football. It wasn't just a mantra, that he really lived it. And I think that was the reason that he was so successful in, you know, conveying the life lessons that, you know, Mike remembered and we're all speaking of. And that so many of his, you know, former players and even students and people he came in contact with brought up at the funeral, that he had a very strong faith, and he knew the importance of family, and he was a teacher at the school as well as a coach. So the students saw, you know, the reverence that he had for his faith, and that it was very genuine. And as you said, it came natural to him. So I think that was, they saw that that he walked the walk.
Veronica, as one of his children, and you and your siblings were all athletes, what was it like to see your father display those characteristics every day in school and on the field and at home, and have to kind of live up to that because you were in the spotlight because of those circumstances?
Well, I mean, it was intense. We were expected to work out in the off season, like he expected his football players to work out in the off season. He had a really demanding off season training regimen for his football players, jump roping, speed stuff, weightlifting, so many X amount of times a week, like 3 times a week. So we all took that on. We did that to be, winners and successful and compete like our older siblings, like our dad. So we worked really hard in the off season too. We had to keep up. I mean, it was important to try to make sure that we were living up to that. We had a work ethic instilled in us too, from watching dad and our older siblings and our mom. I mean, I don't think I appreciated my mom and how much she did until I was way older, and how much she did behind the scenes to make sure
that's true for most
my
of us.
dad was successful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree.
I think that's true for most of us. We don't appreciate all our parents did. Bridget, I know you were not a big football.
I remember being in kindergarten, and you get up on a Saturday, you turn on the Saturday morning cartoons, Jackson 5 and the Osmond Brothers, and our away games were not close. They were in Berks County, so they were, you wanted to get a good 2-hour start before the game. And I didn't understand the concept of, a schedule, a league. I thought we were playing the same team every week. Like, why do we have to go play them again? I think it was because my mom modeled for the rest of the family. She was so engaged, like Veronica said, and caught up in the excitement. I mean, it is a very exciting sport. And then as I got older, I would say by 2nd grade, I was, sold on LC football and the green and gold. I was part of painting the hatchets and stars. And, besides my own family, there was this big, growing extended family. We knew, them in our household, and cherished, all the families and the players that were coming through LC. So I think it was hard not to get caught up in, and this ride went on for, almost 50 years when you think about it, and it got, just as exciting over time. So, I would say my mom really kind of set the example there, and I just followed her lead.
Mike, you covered a lot of those games in the Inter-County League, and they were long road trips into county. So what was that experience like? That's a longer road trip than most reporters take with a team. So what was that experience like, maybe sharing a bus ride with them or with them after the game and you've got the long trip home? Kind of a unique situation for a reporter to be in. What was it like to deal with Coach Algeo in that situation?
Well, actually, a couple of times I, as you mentioned, rode the bus, and it gave me some insight into how excited and how much he shared success with the team. They had beaten, and I forget the opponent, but pick one, because they won quite a few road games. Everybody's assembling on the bus. The players are on there, and Coach Algeo is finishing up with the media, and he takes all the time he needs, and he's answering every question. And then suddenly, slowly, he boards the bus. Now, I'm already on the bus. I've preceded him. And he has this slow, purposeful, sorrowful walk each step like he's been injured. And he's this look on his face like he's about to rip into the team. Now, they've just won by 10 points and played what I consider to be a decent team, a decent game. And based on coach's comments, everything was great. He slowly gets on the bus. Now, the smarter student athletes know what's coming, but the underclassmen, they're not so sure. And they have a look of fear on their face because they think they're about to get ripped into. And coach gets to the front of the bus and slowly stops. And these big, mournful eyes are looking at him. And he looks at them and he yells, "Good one!" And the entire bus explodes in applause. And to witness that is to witness high school football. The enthusiasm, the reward of a job well done, a really, really resounding inter-county league victory. And most coaches, they don't do that. They don't show that kind of emotion. But again, you had a variety of emotions coming from Coach Algeo. Very calm, very animated, and then a celebratory hurrah. And so I told myself, if I was driving to the game, I wouldn't have seen that. I wouldn't have been on the bus. I may have heard the cheer as I pulled out of the parking lot. But to me, that was special for a coach to sort of let his emotions go and share that moment with the team. That's something I hadn't seen before. And I think I wrote about the good one. I hope I did it well. I'll write about it now. In fact, I did write about it in Football Family in the foreword.
You did.
But that was fantastic. And again, he treated members of the media, from the North Penn Reporter, myself, from the Reading newspaper, for any of the weeklies in the Interleague, he did them all with the same eye contact. It was very important to him to have those relationships because he realized this was bigger than him. He was an ambassador for football, for the Intercounty League, for Lansdale, and for Lansdale, Pennsylvania. And I always appreciated him for that.
The thing that comes to mind is the individual he was, that he cared about the player who was the backup linebacker as much as he did his starting quarterback. And that was also the case of anybody that crossed his path. And I know I've written about this and spoken about it. The first year that I covered football for WMTV, which was 1985, was my dad's last fall with us. He was losing his battle with cancer and he passed away the following February. But every time I would cover a Lansdale Catholic game, and we did 6 or 7 games that year, every time I would see him, your mom, your brother, they would always ask how my dad was doing, every time without fail. And that's the way he was with everybody that he crossed paths with. And I'm sure not everything that we said about Lansdale Catholic on the radio we necessarily agreed with. And I'm sure there were times, Mike, that he might not have agreed with everything that you wrote, but he understood that we had jobs to do. And as long as we were fair and doing our jobs the right way, he had no problem with that. That said, he was also very protective of his players too, and which is a good thing. But he was somebody who showed his emotions quite openly, and that's what I remember most about him, is what a caring individual he was. And I'm sure, Bridget, you saw that up close, the family did. And we have a guest star with us, I see.
I want to say hi to my niece, Scarlett.
Where are you? She's trying to set up here and get in the picture.
Yeah, it was a guest feature spot.
Bridget, I think the other thing too. Whoop, there we go. Bridget, I think the other thing that comes to mind, and like Veronica, have you addressed this too, maintaining the balance between football and life. I know all of you were expected, shall we say, to be in Mass every Sunday morning, regardless of how late the game finished the afternoon or the evening before. And he was that way as well. And I remember reading in the book that after winning the state championship, your parents were in Mass the next morning, and striking that balance and impressing upon all of you the fact that there were other things important in life besides football. That, I'm sure, made a big impression on you.
Well, absolutely. There's a couple things. My dad was just really passionate about being a football coach. When I interviewed a couple players, and I would say, well, give me one word that describes my dad. And I always remember Joe Ratinsky used the word obsessed. And he didn't mean it disrespectfully. I understood exactly what he meant. I think when I think about even the morning after the state championship win, and we won on a Saturday, we went home and celebrated with the community and family and friends. I'm pretty sure I went to bed at 5 a.m. My sister and I went to Mass, the 11 o'clock Mass. We weren't, particularly fresh, but we went, and there was just a real unspoken happiness there. So I think that people were part of that balance. I think that's what made that, that win wasn't just about the 2014. There was a lot of people who got behind it and felt like they were part of it. And that's largely because of the faith family football, climate, aura that just pulled people in. Veronica?
Veronica, what about you as far as that? I'll let you address that question as well, the striking that balance between football and the rest of life. And your father was so successful at that. Not every coach is. In fact, I would say more coaches than not are not successful at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Bridget's right, like just talking about the Mass. My dad, at the beginning of every football season, would have usually on a Thursday night, like he would have all the families come meet with their sons, the players, and we'd have hot dogs after practice, and there'd be a Mass in the gym usually. And then on Thanksgiving morning, playing North Penn, there'd always be a Mass at St. Stan's, and followed by a pancake kind of breakfast up at LC in the cafeteria for all the families. And it was important that was a key link with faith and family. And for us, my parents were, they raised us Catholic. And again, going back to things you appreciate more speaking for me, when I'm a parent now of two young ones, I'd gotten away from the Catholic Church a little bit and going to Mass and stuff. But then once I had children, my parents were really gently, saying, hey, how about, kind of coming back and getting the kids involved in Catholic prep, where we volunteer at St. Stan's every other Sunday. And they would just gently nudge me to do that. And I did. And I'm so into it now and back all into it as a parent, and making sure I'm modeling that for my kids. Call me the prodigal daughter or whatever, but it was really great of them to kind of, they weren't mad, they were just gently, nudging me that way, so my kids could also have the kind of childhood guidance I had that way, in faith that I kind of gotten away from, in my 20s and 30s. So I'm really happy to be back involved, and I really give them so much credit for that. Really, it's just really moving, actually.
The family atmosphere was something that was really evident if you spent time around the program. When we were broadcasting of the Lansdale Catholic games in the mid-'80s, those Saturday night games, there weren't necessarily a lot of people there on some night, particularly if it was cold out. But the people that were people that had ties to the program. A lot of them had played for your dad at one point or another. I had the privilege of broadcasting a lot of games with John Wagner and Joe Bertinsky, usually either one or the other would be doing the Lansdale Catholic games with me, which was kind of interesting because Joe, of course, was a center. John was a quarterback. They played with each other. They were teammates. And every time there was a exchange fumble, one or the other had a theory on why it happened. John, of course, would always think it was the center's fault for not getting the ball up quick enough. And Joe would always say it was the quarterback's fault for pulling out too quick. So you got to the point where you're kind of rooting for an exchange fumble to hear one of them go on about that for a minute or two. But that family atmosphere was there, and I think never more so than on Thanksgiving Day. And I'm thinking my Thanksgiving series, did you have a chance to cover one of those? Had that series restarted by then? Because it started and then stopped for a while. Did you ever have a chance to cover one of those Thanksgiving games?
I didn't cover a game, but I did come back from Texas to visit my family, and I think it was '83. I left in '82. The next year, until Thanksgiving, came back, and I was actually wearing a TCU football shirt, believe it or not, and I was on the sidelines watching, and so I got to enjoy that, and I could feel how special it was to be Thanksgiving, and for these two teams to be playing each other. Because growing up in Philadelphia, I attended and graduated from high school. I remember Central and Northeast still had a very, very lengthy Thanksgiving Day tradition, if you will. And so it was great to be a part of that, involving Lansdale Catholic and North Penn High School.
That was always my favorite event of the year to do, was that football game. It was, as we used to call it, Lansdale's version of the Army-Navy game, and there would be the breakfast the morning before the game with players from both teams. I attended that a couple of times, and then you go and do the game. And the thing that struck me was the mutual respect between the two teams, that obviously they went out and play hard, they wanted to win, and all that, but there was that mutual respect. And on a couple of occasions, Coach invited me over to spend part of the day with the family after the game. And I remember, this speaks to how much he had things in perspective. They had lost to North Penn one year, and I stopped by on the way home, but he was in a very mood, wished me a happy Thanksgiving, and his comment at the time was, am I supposed to spoil my Thanksgiving day for my family because we lost a football game? And he just let that question hang in the air for a moment, and it was a wonderful lesson in how we had things in perspective. Bridget, what do you remember about those Thanksgiving games? I know on a couple of occasions, not everybody in the family could be there because they were preparing Thanksgiving dinner, so they were listening to our radio. I know that happened more than once.
Yes, there were some Thanksgivings where I was in attendance, either in the stands or coming back as an alum, or on the sidelines as a statistician. There was one that I remember when my nephew Michael was playing, that I said, "Mom, go ahead and I'll take care of some things, back in the kitchen." So I had it on WNPV. My cousins would often come. My uncle would bring like 3 dozen donuts. We would always be competitive for the most part, is what I remember. It was great. The couple times we managed to win, those were really awesome memories, and they made the dinner a lot better. And then we would go to LC Gym following our dinner, and then we would go play our own games, whether it was basketball or football. Thanksgiving was just, that is definitely something that I miss. That's why, the alum game that they did at North Penn for 4 years, I was really happy my dad, both my parents were able to see that. And even Jim Church was there the first year. Those were really special reunions, I think, and just brought back really great memories. So, yeah, those were really special times.
Veronica, what do you remember about being with your dad on game night? You did statistics for a number of years, but being on the field with him on game afternoon or game night had to be a pretty special experience for you.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I just want to jump in on the whole Thanksgiving thing too. So it was hard for my dad and for our family. None of us are like to lose. We're very competitive, and when we would lose to North Penn, which we did most of the time, and some were just gut wrenching losses, like really close games that they would win in the end. And like the Heike Johnson, we should have won that game. Yeah, just I mean, it still bothers me, but like. And my dad, he would, it was hard. He would really come home and try to make sure he was trying to enjoy Thanksgiving, but it got hard. Some of the losses on the years, we really thought we should have won, and then would, lose a close game. That was really hard for him. But my biggest memories were the two of my most favorite games were the playoff games the night after Thanksgiving. So in the Black Friday night, the night after Thanksgiving, at Plymouth White Marsh High School, in the state quarterfinals in the fall of 1995, when John Patrick was a senior, that game, there was like over 8,000 people there. So many cheering for Lansdale Catholic, and we beat Dunmore in this awesome game. We came from behind. We were down late. Like, it was so much support from Lansdale Catholic, by Lansdale Catholic family, plus other schools in the area. There, you would see their people in the stands, not just the Pac-10, but just Suburban One. They would come and like cheer for. They wanted LC to win. It was basically in our backyard. That state quarterfinal game. It was an awesome game. I'll never forget it. And then the state title run, the Black Friday night game, the day after Thanksgiving at Wissahickon. And, the team we had played was huge. They were huge. That's all we heard all week was how big they were. And it was, tight at first. And then RC broke off this long, RC Lagomorcino broke off this long run. I remember I was standing down on the fence at Wissahickon in the end zone as he was coming at me. And I remember watching it and thinking, where is he? Where is he behind our line? And then all of a sudden he burst through. He had kind of danced behind it like Little Mouse and Maze. And then he burst through and ran off. And the place was like, it was chilling to hear. Just remembering it, like, it was so awesome. The crowd was going nuts. It was so loud. Like, those were games, my dad, my brother, my brother-in-law, my nephew, the coaching staff, they had the team so prepared for those games, and then those kids stepped up big in the biggest moments. They're like my favorite games.
And I want to add, they're both in the book.
Mike, I'm thinking about Coach Algeo as a football tactician. He really had a pretty wide open offense for that time and place. He was not afraid to do some unorthodox things. He was not afraid to throw the ball around a little bit when a lot of high school coaches hesitated to do that kind of thing. I remember, I guess it was John Wagner, who was a quarterback himself, telling me that he always liked having a quarterback on his coaching staff who would encourage him to open things up a little bit. But he was a pretty innovative guy at a time when not a lot of coaches fall outside the box. He was not afraid to do that kind of thing.
I totally agree. And that's what made it so fun on game night to cover the game, because you knew the quarterback was going to do something exciting. They were going to open it up at some point. Loved to hand the ball off. At the time, it was Owen Collins, and I called him Owen because of the way he would drag tacklers. And then Tommy Famularo, and I called him Fam Ram because he would ram into the middle of the line. But that quarterback would drop back. There would be a lot of play action, and it was exciting. It was exciting to cover Lansdale Catholic football for that very reason. And I remember one night, Willie Dunn broke off a 60-yard run in really a one-sided romp reason that he was able to do that, he was a sophomore at the time, the reason he was able to do that was because their passing game had opened things up to the extent that a sophomore could take the ball, get a couple of blocks, and jump into the open field and race down the sideline at Pembroke Middle School. I mean, it was so much fun, if you will, to cover them because it never got boring. And you're right, Coach Algeo, what an innovator he was, and what a great football tactician. And those kids learned not only to win football games from him, but because of that, learned how to do things and how to think outside the box, how to solve problems, how to take care of their families.
And if I could just piggyback on that, my dad really did work hard to surround himself with the best people. His assistant coaches were incredible. And I also want to add, he was innovative in that he put Veronica as part of his staff for a season or two. So I don't know how many high school football coaches do that, but she can tell you a little bit about, her role. She was above the press box, I believe.
Yeah. So with my dad,
what were you doing?
So I was the one who would, I had the headsets on the field, and I would actually relay the offensive play calls up to the coaches up top on top of the press box so they could know what offensive play was coming. He would also listen to some of my input. Sometimes I would go to one of the more coaches with more seniority and tell them what I was thinking, what I saw, and then they would go and talk to Dad about a possible play call off of that. And he would listen. It was really awesome. That kind of went back to when I was in high school. My senior year in high school, we had a bunch of my friends who were juniors and seniors, fellow athletes. We all found out that some area public schools had a girls flag football team. So we wanted to compete against Methacton. And Methacton agreed. So I had to hurry up and get this team ready. So my dad and we would meet in the kitchen and talk about a plan. This was during his season and in the fall of '85. And we would talk about a plan of how to get the team ready. And one of the things was assign the girls different positions, have a little skull session, for the brain, for the head, and meet my dad's classroom on a day off, go over the positions on the chalkboard with the girls so they understood, and then assign them to watch the game that following weekend, the LC football game, and who on their position they should be watching. Like if you're a wide receiver, watch Sean Friel, that kind of thing, or Chris Walsh, or offensive line, you're watching Mike Wagner here, that kind of thing. And it was 11 on 11, it wasn't a 7-on-7 flag football or 9-on-9. And so kicking and punting. And then my dad sat with me and went over plays, but in his playbook, and he just simplified. He said, let's simplify the play calls, because his offensive play calls were really long, like a paragraph. And so he would simplify it so I could teach the girls, vertigo this. It was really cool. So I would teach the girls from the playbook. We'd practice on days off. We'd have the whole field hockey field to ourselves to practice. And then we played Methacton, who had been doing this for several years. And our one game, we won 38-0. And I put it in the yearbook. You had your little, everyone's senior in the yearbook had their little thing they could tell about themselves, and all the girls on the team but one of their little things was 38-0. And we all knew, and I know this day what it meant. So it was pretty cool. My dad was a big part of that.
See, they don't like to lose.
It's a wonderful memory. It's a wonderful memory. Thinking about how high school football has changed over one other point I wanted to get to. As much as your dad accomplished, he had never won a state championship until it was 2004 when you finally were able to do that. How satisfying for him and for his family after coming close a couple of times and having had so much success to finally get to the top and then win a state championship?
Oh gosh, I mean, words really do fail me to express that feeling. That was such a great time, and I feel was just a gift from God. You know, I know we would have like postseason success. I never, and that team was at one point the season before 0-5. They won their last 6 games, the year before. So, which was great, but I just never kind of put that on the radar. I thought, they're going to do, they're going to go so far. And, like most high school teams, it's going to come to an end before Hershey. So every time we got closer, and you start to see this could be a reality. The moment for me that I remember so vividly was when Matt Mineta intercepted and scored against, I think it was Littleton or Littletown. And they were a really good team. They were a fabulous team. It was a great contest. Yeah. And I just remember bursting into tears because I thought we're going to Hershey. And, then it was a whole, there's nothing I did to impact the situation. I would look up these teams and scout them. Not that I had any impact on the game. I just wanted to know who we were playing because Grove City was a Cinderella team. And I just remember all week long just praying to God, like, who knows when we get back here again. My dad was pushing 70 at that point, and I didn't want to see him come to the brink and then it be denied. So it was just like I said, it was a gift from God. That's how I see it.
Veronica, we'll give you the same question. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was it's like Bridget said, it's pretty indescribable, that journey through 2004. My dad had quintuplet heart bypass surgery in February of 2004, so that he was alive and well and able to coach the whole season in 2004 was itself a minor miracle. And then the journey that him and his staff and his players and everyone, the family supporting supporting that team. And as they got closer, like Bridget said, it was just, wait, this is going to happen. And then, the Matt Mineta interception, we were jumping up, down, going crazy in the stands at Coatesville High School on that Saturday afternoon. And it was just amazing. And I remember being interviewed by a reporter before the game at Hershey, and they asked me a similar question. And I broke down in tears thinking, here we are at the pinnacle, and my dad's been coaching for such a long time, and all the years that the families and our family put into this in all different ways, from painting the helmets to washing the clothes that my mom did earlier on, and making cookies. My sisters would make cookies for injured players and keeping stats on the sidelines, or doing the water when we were little as a water boy or girl, depending on who it was. And then here we are on the cusp of a state title. And, when my dad started coaching, the state title was like this mythical thing. They didn't have a state tournament. And now here we were, and it was just really moving. And to look up in the stands out at Hershey and see all the different players from years past there, to see this, because they were in essence a part of this and the fabric of this. And then to hear that the players who couldn't go were having tailgates around television sets on the PCN channel, the Pennsylvania network, to watch the game live. It's just, and then when we won, and to celebrate afterwards at LC, and Channel 6 was at the Lansdale Catholic parking lot, and the mayor came, and then it was just, I just felt like so happy for my dad and my mom. And I can't really put it into words. It's really the best I can do.
Our thanks to Bridget and Veronica Algeo and Mike Stern for joining us for Remembrances of a Football Family, and our thanks to all of you for tuning in. For those of you who were privileged to know him, we hope our conversation helped you relive your own memories of Coach Jim Algeo and his family. For those of you who did not know him personally, we hope our discussion gave you some insights into what a truly great and remarkable man was all about. My name is Rick Woelfel. Thank you again for joining us.